Hello, this is MusicTechHelpGuy, and welcome to episode 49 of my Logic Pro 10 video tutorial series. In this episode, we're going to continue on from the previous episode talking about the ES2 synthesizer. In the previous episode, we talked about the oscillators, we talked about the filters, the effects generator, the modulation routers, LFOs, and envelopes. And also what we did is we created a basic, kind of synth pad patch that had a amplitude kind of stutter effect on LFO2, slow filter sweep on LFO1, as well as a resonance sweep on envelope 2. And so what I did just off screen was I created a really basic just kind of chord idea for this. Now that's pretty cool, but what if I want to be able to have more control over some of these modulation parameters across time, as opposed to them automatically being controlled by an envelope or an LFO? One thing I really like to do is I like to make use of the XY pad over here. As I said in the previous episode, the XY pad has nothing to do with the effects around it. The XY pad is essentially just a two parameter controller that you can sync up to the modulation routers here. And you can also use it in vector mode, which we'll get to in just a moment. What I'm going to do is I'm going to make the cutoff sweep be controlled by pad X, and I'm going to make the resonance sweep be controlled by pad Y. So when you directly control them this way, when you put the X and Y pad as the modulation source, you're directly controlling the cutoff frequency or the cutoff sweep or the resonance sweep. So the LFO and the envelope are taken completely out of the equation. Now, in order to do this, you can actually just press play and you'll hear the difference in tone as I move the XY pad around. The problem is that it doesn't save the motion unless you write that in with automation. Now, one of the reasons why I split up this video and started here with this video is that between the last episode and this episode, I switched over to my laptop, which is currently running Logic 10.0.6. Unfortunately, there is a bug with the ES2, and just the ES2, in version 10.0.7, the most recent version at this point, where you cannot write plugin automation in the ES2. You can do it with all the other synths, but not the ES2. So keep in mind, if you're using 10.0.7, you're not going to be able to do this. If you're running 10.0.6 and earlier, you should be able to do this. So this is just a known bug where you're not able to write in plugin automation like you should be able to. Okay, so first thing I'm going to do is going to hit A to pull up automation, and I'm going to change the automation mode from read to latch. And we'll go a little bit deeper into what the live automation modes are later on, but essentially latch, including touch and write, they allow you to write in automation in real time by moving a controller around. So all I have to do now is just press play. You don't have to press record, you just press play, and then I can move that XY controller around. And what it's going to do is it's going to create an automation shape for us that is equal to both the X and Y axes on this XY pad. And then we'll be able to play this back and it'll remember the motion that I drew in. So, and this might get a little glitchy just because I'm trying to run a screen capture at the same time. So let's see how this works. And there you go. And so what you can see is that it's actually written two different shapes of automation. There's one here in pink in the front, and there's another one here kind of hidden in the background. One of those is the X pad, and one of them's the X axis, and one's the Y axis. So if I just decrease my track zoom here, what you can do is you can click on this little arrow here. It'll open up another automation lane. And what I can do is choose the X or Y modulation pad axis to be shown on this. So since my upper one there, it says it's mod pad Y, the bottom one, I want this to be mod pad X. So you can view both the X and Y axes at the same time. You could go in here and you could type in the automation, you could draw in the shape. But just remember, again, if you're using Logic 10.7, it's not going to let you draw in the automation like this with the ES2. You'll turn latch on, you'll hit play, you'll move the XY pad around, and nothing will get written. You could, like I said, you can still draw it in, and the ES2 will react to the automation, but you just can't draw. You can't move the controller in real time in 10.0.7. It's a bug that needs to be fixed. One thing you want to make sure you do is after you draw automation in this way, is you want to change the automation mode back to read so that we don't accidentally write any more automation. And then I'm just going to hit A to close automation mode out. And I'm just going to open up the ES2 again, and then I will just hit play, and we should see the XY pad move around to the automation that we drew in. And there you go. You can also do this with pretty much virtually any control in the ES2. If I just want to move my cutoff here manually, you can do that. If you want to move one of the oscillators manually, you can do that as well. Pretty much any knob or fader in the ES2 is fully automatable. What I'm going to do is I'm going to option click on the XY pad to set it back to the center. And I'm also going to I'm going to click on this track, go to Mix, delete automation, and then I'm going to choose delete all automation on selected track because I want to get rid of the automation that's on it. So now I hit A, no automation. All right, the next thing I want to show you how to do is I want to show you how to use the vector mode. In addition to the router mode, you can also have vector mode. The vector mode is essentially a vector envelope. And one of the things I mentioned in the previous video is that with envelopes, they don't repeat. With LFOs, they do repeat. With a vector envelope, it's a special type of envelope where you can create basically as many stages as you want, or as many stages as you'd possibly need. And you can make it repeat itself and loop itself. You can make it go forward, and backward. So there's all sorts of cool things you can do with this. I'm just going to show you the kind of the tip of the iceberg thing that you can do with the vector envelope. And it's one of my favorite things to do with it. And that is to create kind of rhythmic motion sequences, or kind of sometimes they're called gated synths, because it's like a synth that has almost like a rhythmic motion to it. So what I'm going to do is, going back to router mode, I'm actually going to turn off my amplitude effect here that I created earlier. It's just option click on it. Whoops, wrong keyboard. There we go. I have two keyboards sitting out here right now. And I'm going to keep and actually I can turn these off as well, because that's not going to matter. So let's go back to vector mode. And the first thing we need to do is we need to assign two modulation targets to be affected over time. And you can do that right here. There's an X target and a Y target. And these do correspond to the XY pad as well, which is why I got rid of the routers over here, because I'm going to reassign the X and Y pad in vector mode instead. So let's say that the X axis, I want this to be volume or amplitude. So I'll choose amplitude. And then for the Y target, I'm going to make this cutoff 1 and 2. There we go. And again, I apologize about the glitchiness. My screen capture software does not run as well on my laptop. What I'm also going to do is I'm going to pull the intensity up. The intensity at 0 is a lot like having one of these green knobs over here at 0, it means that the modulation router is going to do nothing. If I have my intensity at 0, nothing's going to happen. So I need to pull this up, and it's a factor between 0 and 1. You could even go in the negative as well. And I'm going to pull this up a bit as well. Maybe not all the way, though. There we go. The next thing we need to do is we need to choose a vector mode. And right now, the vector mode is off. And so I want to be able to control these two parameters with my XY pad. So for my vector mode, I'm going to choose XY. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to initialize this, this vector envelope to a 16/16 or an 8/8 loop. If you right-click on it, you can see it. You can see there's two options: initialize to 8/8 or 16/16 loop. This essentially breaks up the envelope into 8 equal pieces. So I'm going to do this with 16/16. There we go. And why does this say 498 and these say... Let me just hang on a moment. We just delete these points. Let's actually clear envelope, right-click clear envelope. We'll try this again. Right-click, initialize to 16/16. There we go. It's still doing something weird, but we'll see what it sounds like later. Essentially, what we can do now is for each one of these stages, each one of these points on the envelope, we can choose a different XY position. And that's what the XY mode does. Let me put it back in XY mode. And so without any automation, without us having to move these controls around, the envelope will essentially kind of automatically control the position of the XY pad over here. So what I'm going to do is just click on the first point and then just choose a spot. And click on the next point and choose a spot. And I'm kind of just doing this at random, but you can kind of, if you remember, what each kind of zone sounds like, you can kind of tailor this into a rhythmic sequence that you like. You can also click on this solo point button down here, and if you play your MIDI controller, you'll be able to hear what the tone of that particular position sounds like. So I could click here and then make sure solo point is on, and then play my MIDI controller, and you'll hear what the tone sounds like just at that point without actually cycling through the whole envelope. Because I don't have a MIDI controller hooked up right now, I'm not going to do that. So just going through, randomly picking spots. There we go, and let's go like way down here. I'm going to put the very first point right in the center. Okay. Now, when you initialize this to a 16/16 loop, what's supposed to happen is you'll normally see like a percentage here. I'm not really sure why this is happening. Normally, it'll show us like a percentage, like 12 point something percent or something along those lines. I think that's it with an 8/8 loop. But what you can do is you can choose a loop rate. And my loop rate is 1/1. That's basically means a whole note. So it means this entire loop is equal to one measure of music. So if I press play, it should play through a weird sort of morphed sequence where the X and Y pad is just jumping all over the place 16 different times. And there you go. Now, if I wanted this to happen a little bit faster, you would just set your loop rate to a shorter loop. And yeah, there we go. When I moved it, it kind of corrected the glitch. So many glitches in Logic 10, I tell you what. So let's go to a half note. So now this whole sequence is a half note long, and so you'll hear the motion of this effect go faster. Or if I want it to be slower, I could set it to, maybe 2 bars instead of 1 bar. So we can go 2 bars. Now, yet another thing that you can do with this is, in addition to controlling the position of the XY pad, you can also control the position of the triangle over here, of the mix of the three oscillators. So if you want to do that, you just change the vector mode from XY to mix or mix plus XY. So mix plus XY is going to let us control this and this simultaneously. So now for each one of these points, I can also choose a position on the triangle, and you can get a different balance between the three oscillators. So I can kind of make this jump around between the three oscillators in sort of like a rhythmic pattern. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm just going to choose some random points like last time. And sometimes this is really the best way to do it. Just randomly choose spots, and if there's like a point that doesn't really sound right, you can go tweak it and then listen to it and see what it sounds like. So like I said, this is a really great way to create sort of like rhythmic sequences and make the synthesizer not only have like a tonal, like a chordal, idea with it, it also has a rhythmic kind of motive behind it as well. And there you go. So that's just the vector envelope in a nutshell. It's much more complex than I'm making it out to be. I've just barely kind of scratched the surface on it, and I talk a little bit more about it in my ES2 tutorial series that's separate from this Logic series. So if you're really interested in that, you can go check that out, or just read the manual. Two last things I want to show you with the ES2 is if you would prefer to use the routers as opposed to the vector mode to control things, to control targets, and you want to be able to learn a MIDI continuous controller that maybe that isn't included in the VIA menu. So for instance, if I want to control, like we did before, I want to control the amount of a stutter effect, I'll say amp, with an LFO, and you click on your VIA, and velocity is there, the pitch bend is there, modulation wheel is there. You can also choose from 6 different, they're labeled Control A through F, 6 different continuous controllers. And these are mappable, learnable MIDI controllers, or continuous controllers. So if I click on Control A, I can create a range for it, just like we did with the modulation wheel. But what I would do is go down here and click on the MIDI button, and what you'll see is controls A through F. We talked a little bit about this when we were going over continuous controllers earlier on in this series, and you can change Control A to any of your 128 MIDI CCs. So if I want to control this with my volume fader, which is CC7, you just assign Control A to be number 7, and that means that this is going to be controlled by CC7. If you don't know what CC number a particular fader is on your keyboard, all you have to do is choose the Learn option, and then move that fader, and it'll automatically learn it for you. So real quick, I'm just going to off-screen this. I need to plug in my MIDI keyboard so I can actually show you how to map this, and I'll be right back. Okay, so I'm back, and I've got my MIDI controller hooked up. What I'm going to do now is, since I want to control the amount of the stutter effect with a MIDI continuous controller, I'm going to go to Learn, and then I'm just going to move one of the faders on my MIDI controller, and it'll actually just map that control for us. So I'm moving the fader. That fader happens to be CC72. So this is just a great way to learn, learn a various fader or knob on your MIDI controller if you're not sure what the exact CC number is. So now when I push that fader down, we don't get much of the stutter effect, but if I push it up, we get more of that stutter effect. So then we can, you know, you could map up, you know, like I said before, there's 6 of them. You could map up to 6 different faders or knobs and have those 6 faders or knobs control 6 different parameters in the ES2. The very last thing I want to show you about the ES2 is the ability to randomize it. I don't really use this much, but it is useful if you're just trying to come up with, you know, weird sound effects and things like that. The randomization feature is right here. You just click on this RND button, and it automatically just randomizes it. And you can choose an intensity for the randomization between 1 and 100%. Now, obviously, the higher this goes, the more random everything's going to be. And you can also choose what features you want to randomize. I'm going to stick with all, so everything's randomized. And I'm going to go ahead with 100%. Let's click on it, and we're going to get a completely random patch. Now, these generally don't sound, they're not generally musically useful, but they're kind of cool for just for generating, you know, like random sound effects and things like that. So here's this one. Not that useful. Let's click on it again. We'll get another one. Let's try again. Oh, that was completely useless. Let's try another one. So a lot of them are really, really random and not very musically useful. But if you're trying to generate like computer sounds and maybe like some sound effects for film or something that you're doing, a film project you're doing, you could try using that. All right, so that's the ES2 in a nutshell. Like I said before, this is in no way a complete tutorial on it, more or less just an overview for you. And again, remember, if you skipped over the beginning of the video, you're only going to be able to use the plugin automation if you're using Logic 10.0.6 or lower. 10.6 or 10.0.7 is where this bug emerged. So I'm assuming that once 10.0.8 comes out, that they will have fixed that, because as far as I've read, it is a confirmed bug, and so hopefully it's something they take care of in the next update. So I hope you enjoyed the video, and thanks for watching.